Okay, good morning everyone. We have a major topic today, a geschmacka topic, but we're limited in time. But let's give it a good shot. We know that one of the main principles of Nedarim is that when you make a nadar and you use the process of Hatfasa, you can only be matfis b'davar Hanadur, you can't be matfis b'davar ha'asar. You can only use this process of Hatfasa, whether it's extension or accessing of something that was asar mitam nedar, not as something which is asar mitam isser. Okay, what's the reason for that? Why could you only be mad for something that's asar midin nedar? And for example, we had in the Mishnah that you can't be madfis from besar chazir or something else which is asr. Only, let's see, we had on Yud Gimel Beis, kebesar chazir, kavoidas kechavim, ka'eres levuvin, kenavelos utrevas, kishgasim uramasim, kechalas arnuch shemasai mutter. What's the reason you can't be matfis in davar ha'asr, only in davar hanadur? The Ran seems to say two different things. And these two different things seem like a stira. So we're going to have a stira in the Ran, what the reason why you can't be matfis b'davar ha'asar, and we're going to have one of the most important stiras in the Rambam in Masechta Nedarim. And this is going to open up a massive vista of understanding what Hatfasa is and different types of Hatfasa. Okay. Let's see. Let's start with the Ran on Daf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. The Ran on Daf Yud Daled says, what's the reason you can only be matfis b'davar Hanadur? Look in this Ran. Umefarkinan le'esar isar misbai l'chedatanya ezehu isar. Koloimar, v'kivan de'efshar l'ukma lahach drasha lahachi mukmasla mishum desvarahi the matfis b'davar ha'asar loy chayal b'debishlama b'davar hanadur matzi la'atvusei v'loymar kikar ze alai b'neder v'karban shenesar aydei neder. He says it's a svara. The Ran says the svarahi. It's a svara. The matfis b'davar ha'asar loy chayal. When you're matfis b'davar ha'asar, it does not take effect. Bishlama davar hanadur. You could be matfis and you could say kikar ze alai beneder v'karban. This kikar is asur upon me, as a neder and a karban. Shenesar aydei karban. A karban was asur through a neder. So think about it. I could say this loaf of bread is asur to me beneder and karban. You know why? Because a karban is asur through a neder. Avol kimatvis b'davar asur. But when I say this should be upon me beneder, like chazir, lav klum kamar. You're not saying anything. Tehechi lema. What should you say? Kikar zeh alai kibesar chazir. That this kikar should be like the meat of a pig? La yafshar, it's not possible. The basar chazir asri rachmana. Basar chazir the Torah asred. V'hu la yasre. And he didn't asr it. What's the Ran saying? The only way you could do Hatfasa is if I say this item should be a neder, like a karban. Very good. A karban is an isser neder. So I could say, this loaf of bread should be asr like a neder. This loaf of bread should be an isser neder like a karban, because a karban is an isser neder. If I say this loaf of bread should be a neder like a karban, that's a meaningful statement, because a karban is asr because of neder. I could create an isser neder if I say this should be a neder like a karban, because a karban is an isser neder. But if I say this should be an isser neder like pig, well, it doesn't make any sense, because pig is not asr through a neder. Pig is just asr. So the Ran seems to be saying that the reason why you have to be matfis b'davar nadar, not b'davar asr, is because it doesn't make sense to be matfis b'davar ha-asr. How do you create an isser neder? Like in a davar ha-asr, a davar asr is not an isser neder, but a carbon is an isser neder. So I could say this should be asr to me b'neder like a carbon, because a carbon is an isser neder. But I can't say this should be asr to me as a neder like a pig, because pig is not an isser neder, it's a Torah's isser. So the Ran seems to be saying on Daf Yadalid that it only makes sense to be mafis b'davar hanadur, not b'davar ha'asr. The Ran in Masechta Shua says something else entirely. The Ran in Masechta Shua seems to say that the process of Hatfasa is hamshachas kedusha, where I am mamshech, I draw, I extend, I continue sanctity. Well, that only makes sense by kachim, by carbon, by eitzim, by imra, by dirim, because they have kodesh, they have hektish. So I'm mamshech the yisur kodesh. But I can't do it to a pig. A pig doesn't have hektish, so there's nothing to be mamshech. That's a completely different svara. It's just a different svara. The Ran in Nedarim on Daf Yudalet says you can only be matfis b'davar hanadur because a davar hanadur, I can only be matfis b'davar hanadur because if I'm making a neder, I can only, when my statement only makes sense if I say there should be a neder like a davar hanadur, because a davar hanadur is also asr mitam neder. But I can't say that I want to create a neder like that davar ha'asr. The davar ha'asr is not asr mitam neder. The Ran in Shua says that the reason why you can only be matfis b'davar nadar is because the process is hamshacha. The Ran here says Lefika chani oimer dehachi perusha demeikara makshinan midatanya ezehu iser da'ama ezehu iser da'ama iser hainu matfis. Kamashikasafti lamala. Ubasar hachi amrinan amar lacharava tritz ve'ema hachi ezehu iser nedar amar b'toira kalaymar deloy be'iser dekra iri deloymar shumatfis ela be'ikar nedar the ikar nedar ha'amar b'toira hainu shataloy b'davar hanadar. The main nedar that's said in the Torah is taloy b'davar hanadar. V'soif davar ke'echad mi nidrei hektish. The resultant end is it's like one of the nidrei hektish. Dahainu ke'imra, that is ke'imra, ke'dirim, debelav hachi, nadar rishon loy mishkachas lei. The end is ke'nidrei hektish, like imra, like dirim, otherwise the first nadar would not be possible. Avo b'loy hatfasa iyafshar loy lesar samuter. Without the process of hatfasa, you can't prohibit something which is mutter. Elam emnesha kodesh oisa chalipin. The process is hektish makes chalipin. Once something is holy, you could exchange it, extend it, expand it. Af hu yachal lahatbis isuroi b'davar hamuter loy oila acherim v'zehu ikar neder. V'hainu da'amrinon ad sheyidar b'davar hanadar she'ikar neder b'hatfasahu. The main neder is b'hatfasa.
So what about truma and chala?
It doesn't work because it's not an isser neder. It's an isser. Both, in other words, the Ran in Nedarim would say truma and chala, the Torah asserted. Therefore, when I say I want to make a neder that this should be like truma and chala, it's meaningless because truma and chala are not asser as a neder. And the Ran here in Shavuos would say I can't be mamshech hektish from truma and chala because truma and chala are not hektish. It's an isser Torah. V'hainu da'amrinan ad shida b'davar nadar sheker neder b'hatfas v'afal pi shem lo yitfisu chayil. Now this, we once discussed this. There are two processes of neder. There's making a neder straight and a neder through hatfasa. So the Ran wants to know if the way neder works is you extend kedusha. How does a neder work if I'm not matfis? It's a yad to hatfasa. Hahu midin yadhu demahani shekshu oimer hareze asur alai anu goimrim devarav. When a person says this should be asur to me, we finish his words and we say what he means is kikarban. But ikar neder matfisu. Ulafika chamatfis beneder nadar. Kalamar sha'amar zeh kazeh chayil. Okay. Bottom line is we have a steer on the Ran. The Ran in Nedarim and Daf Yudalid says the reason why you can only be matfis b'davar nadar is because it only makes sense to be matfis b'davar nadar. Because if you're trying to create an Isser Neder and you're saying this should be like a pig, well, a pig is not an Isser Neder, so your statement is meaningless. It has no mashmaos. But if you say I want to create an Isser Neder like that carbon, well, that makes sense because the carbon is asur mitam neder. But the Ran in Shua says that a totally different rationale. That the reason you can only be mafis with davar nadar is because it's working through extension of kedusha. There's no extension of kedusha by pig. There's no kedusha by pig. There's only isser. How do you extend it? This is the kasha of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman in Sefer Kovetz Biurim on Masechta Shavuos. That's question number one. Stira and the Ran. Okay, question number two is another very important inyan here. I actually only wanted to do this part of it because the other part was very complex, but I can't help it. So we're going to keep this second part very simple. The second part is both of these sugyas are like main sugyas in Nedarim, and somehow we're doing both of them today, and we have to finish soon. Okay, this is a stira in the Rambam. You know, the Gemara has a shaila. The shaila began on, what was it? Yud Aleph Amud Beis. The shaila was the shaila of Rami Bar Chama. When you say Harei Alai Kibasar Zivchei Shlamim, do we say Bi'ikaroi Kamatfis, Oy Achshav Kamatfis, Oy Behetera Kamatfis? The Gemara ultimately says the case is you have a piece of good meat and you have a piece of Shlamim meat. It's after the Zrikas Hadam, so it's mutter. And you say Zeh Kazeh. Do you mean that the permitted meat should be like the essential state of the shlamim, which is asur, mitam nedar, or like the current state, which is a davar heter? And the Gemara went through many cases. The Gemara tried to prove from Bechar, it's a machlekes tanoim, and ultimately the Gemara has no conclusion. So we don't really have a definitive answer. What's the halacha to Rami Bar Chama shaila? Do we say beikare kamatfis or behashta kamatfis? So the Ran on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, this is the one part of the Ran I did not read inside when we learned it this past Monday. The Ran quotes the Ramban that even though normally, you know, when you have a suffix Nedarim l'chumra, the Ramban's opinion is that we are mekel, that if you say Zeh Kazeh by Bechar, the Ramban's conclusion is that we do not say bi'ikare kamatfis, we say behetera kamatfis. The Ran quotes Ramban nekatinon to behetera kamatfis. We paskin behetera kamatfis, okay? That we're lenient. Presumably then, if you would have kosher meat and bechar meat and you say zeh kazeh, it should be permitted. Because bechar, bi'ikare, behetera kamatfis is right now la'achar zrikas dam. It's permitted, yeah. So the Ramban says the conclusion of the sugya is behetera kamatfis. Then it should come out, if that's the case, if behetera kamatfis. Bottom line is we should say that if you're matfis b'bechar, it's mutter, yeah. That's what it should come out. There is a major stira in the Rambam. The Rambam argues on the Ramban. The Rambam paskins l'chumra that if you're matfis bebasar zivchei shlamim after zrika, aser. The Rambam paskins regarding the question of Rami Bar Chama that we say bi'ikaroi kamatfis. You got it? The Rambam paskins bi'ikaroi kamatfis l'chumra. The Ramban says behetera kamatfis. The Rambam says l'chumra be'isser kamat bi'ikaroi kamatfis. Everyone asks on the Rambam, really bi'ikaroi kamatfis? But the Rambam paskins, like Rabbi Yehuda, that a bechar is not a davar hanadur. And it's a davar ha'asur. And if you're matfis b'bechar, if you say kikar ze alai kibechar, mutter. Okay? Now, but What if you have so the Rambam paskins, A, bi'ikarei kamatfis. Number 2, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda, that bechar is not a davar hanadur, it's a davar aser. If you say kikar za'alai kebechar, mutter. But what if you have besar bechar in front of you? Before zerikas hadam, if you say zek hazeh aser. What? If you say zek hazeh aser? I understand the Rambam holds bi'ikarei kamatfis, but the Rambam holds that a bechar is a davar ha'aser, not a davar hanadar. So why, if you say zek hazeh, is it aser? If the Rambam holds bechar is a davar ha'aser, and matfis by loy mahani, so then why, if you say zek hazeh bebechar, is it aser? Now the Rambam holds if you say zek hazeh by bechar achar zrikas hadam. I'm sorry, if let's say you say harei zek kebechar la'achar zrikas hadam, it's mutter. Why would it be mutter? The Rambam holds bi'ikarei kamatfis, and if you would have done it, if the meat is in front of you and if it was kaidem zrikas hadam, it would be permitted. If it was kaidem zrikas hadam, and you said zek hazeh, then it would be aser. So in other words, how do these different psakim of the Rambam, how do they jibe? The Rambam paskins bi'ikarei kamatfis. Fine. The Rambam also holds that bechar is davar ha'asar, and therefore if you say kikar zayalai kebechar, mutter, because you're matfis b'davar ha'asar. But if you have the meat of a bechar in front of you, koidem zrikas hadam, if you say zek hazeh, asar. So number 1, why in the world would it be asar? It's a davar ha'asar. Number 2, if you're matfis b'basar bechar la'achar zrikas hadam, mutter. But why? If koidem zrikas hadam, the Hatfasa is effective, then why don't we say bi'ikarei kamatfas even la'achar zrikas hadam? Let's come back to the steer on the Ran. The Ran in Nedarim says the reason why you have to be matfis b'davar hanadur is because it only makes sense b'davar hanadur. I'm trying to create an iser neder. How could I do it b'davar aser? The Ran in Shua says it works as a hamshacha. So Rabbi Elchanon in Shua daf chaf, ad sheyider b'davar hanadur because of Ran hatam iser kedushahu b'neder shenimshach v'nitbas v'lo iser greda. The way Nedarim works is I extend, it's not just an iser, but I'm mamshech. V'hainu da Hatfasa inyana hamshachas ha-kedusha. The way Hatfasa works is I extend kedusha ala kikar shenoider himenu. But the question is, in Nedarim on daf Yudaled, the Ran writes a different reason. Bishlama b'davar nadar, I could be matfis, and I could say kikar ze alai b'neder kakarban, because a carbon is a serneder. Avol ki matfis b'davar aser lav klum kamar. It's meaningless. Dehechi leima kikar zalai kebasar chazir. How could I say I'm making a neder that this should be like basar chazir? Lo yafshir. It's not possible. The basar chazir aser rachmana. How could I create an isser like a basar chazir? The basar chazir, the Torah asered. How could I create an isser like the Torah? You ready for Rabbi Elchanon's Chiddush of the century, a Shas Chiddush? Says Rabbi Elchanon, there are 2 types of Hatfasa. So that means there are 3 types of Nedarim. There's just making a neder. This should be aser. But when I do Hatfasa, there are 2 types. One type is I extend. One type is I create. When do I extend? If I have another piece of meat in front of me that's already aser mitam neder, I could extend the iser kedusha in it. So let's say I have a piece of a carbon chatas in front of me, and I say zek hazeh. Whatever kedusha is in the carbon chatas, I pull it. When I'm extending, the reason why I can only do it a davar another, not a davar aser, is because a davar another has kedusha. Davar aser doesn't have kedusha. There's nothing to extend. There's another kind of Hatfasa. Another kind of Hatfasa says, I'm creating it, but I'm saying that I'm creating it like another thing that could be created. Well, that only makes sense if the other thing was created and not something that the Torah asered. There's Hatfasa by a real, when I have a real live Kedusha item in front of me that I'm pulling from. And then there's Hatfasa when I'm just invoking the way it works elsewhere, but not that I have an actual live specimen of Isser Kedusha in front of me. These are two different worlds of Hatfasa. Says Rabbi Meir, there are two reasons. If there's a process of drawing, that's only possible if it's lying in front of you. But if the Davar Hanadur is not in the world, then there's no way to do it. It could go in Harini Kashimshain. Let's say a guy says, I want to be like Shimshain. The thing is, it's very nice you want to be like Shimshain, but Shimshain HaGibur is not alive anymore. So you're not extending Shimshain's Kedusha, you're invoking that you want to create an Isser just like Shimshain has an Isser on it. You're not pulling the Kedusha that's on Shimshain. Let's say I say I want this to be like a chatas. Great. There's no chatas today extant that you're pulling from. This hatfasa is a nedar. That's what the Ram means on Daf Yudalet. That I'm creating the Isser. So I can only say I'm creating an Isser like something else that was an Isser Neder, because I'm saying I'm creating an Isser just like that thing was created. But I'm not being Mamshech. But the reasoning of a Hamshacha is what the Ran is talking about in Shvus. The reason of Hamshacha helps where it's not Shaykh Hatfasa in the Guf HaNeder. See, in Nedarim, on Daf Yud Aleph, we have the Shaila of Rami Bar Chama, Harei Alai Kibesar Zivchei Shlomim La'achar Zrikas Damim Mahu. Right, we have a Shaila. Let's say I say it should be like Zivchei Shlomim after Zrikas Hadam. So the Gemara says, if you said that Lashon, that you want it to be La'achar Zrikas Hadam, so Behetero Kamarfis. So the Gemara says the case is, you have basar zivchei shlamim lying in front of you, and heter meat lying in front of you, and you say zeh kazeh. Regarding that shaila, we say bi'ikarei kamadfis. Lema ketanoi, and the Gemara says it's machlokes tanoim because Rabbi Yaakov says by bechar asur Yehuda mater. If lifnei zrika, it should be mutter. If after zrika, it should be asur. Says the Gemara, the case is where you have some meat of a bechar in front of you and heter meat in front of you, and you say zeh kazeh. Isn't that a machlokes tanoim? No, it's talking about lifnei zrikas hadam. You say this should be like bechar lifnei zrikas hadam. Why is it mutter? Because it's a davar ha'asr, not a davar hanadur. Okay, so how do we paskin? The Rambam in Parak Aleph and Nedarim Halachiah Gimel paskins, if you say Harei Alai Kibachar, 0. Because Bachar is a davar ha'asr, not a davar hanadur. So the Rambam paskins, bottom line, Harei Alai Kibachar, 0. Bachar is a davar ha'asr, not a davar hanadur. Who does that go like? Who is that a psak like? Rabbi Yehuda. Bechar is davar ha'asar. But then the Rambam paskins that if you have kachim or shlamim after zrikas damim, shumutu azarim, and you say zeh kazeh asar. Why? Bi'ikarei kamafis. What about if it's a bechar? So I would have said if it's a bechar, it doesn't work. Because the Rambam already paskin bechar is davar ha'asar, not davar ha'nadar. So the Rambam says, no, if the meat is lifnei zrikas hadam, asar, after zrikas hadam, mutter. Wait a second. Lifnei zrikas hadam, mutter, after zrikas hadam, lifnei zrikas hadam asar, la'achar zrikas hadam mutter. Wait a second. The Rambam already paskind bechar is davar ha'asar. The Rambam also paskins that zeh kazeh by other karbanis is asur because bikarei kamadfis. Presumably that has no bearing on Bechar because Bechar is Davar ha'asur. Then the Rambam says if you say zeh kazeh by Bechar, it's going to depend if it's lifnei zrikas hadam or after zrikas hadam. That makes no sense. Because the Rambam already told us that there's no process of Hatfasa by Bechar because it's Davar ha'asur. Elamai, you're going to say he holds there is a process of Hatfasa by Bechar. It's a Davar nadar. So then even Achar Zrikas Hadam, it should be Asur, because Rambam says Bikari Kamadfis. So Rabbi Chanan asks these questions. Tamua, number one, the Rambam already said Bechar is Davar HaAsur. And number two, Miman of Shach. If it's a Davar Hanadur, then it should work even La'achar Zrika, because Neikar Kamadfis. I mean, what in the world is the Rambam saying by Bechar? How could he hold Bechar as Davar HaAsur? And yet it's a Davar Asur, and you could be matfis it, but only Lefnei Zrikas Hadam? Why not after Zrikas Hadam? If it's a Davar HaAsur, you should never be able to be matfis from it. That's why the Rambam says that by Bechar, Zeh Kazeh, if you say Harezu B'Bechar, it's meaningless, because it's a Davar Asur. Must be that when you say Harezu Kebechar, you're not extending Kedusha, because there's no Bechar in front of you. No Bechar in front of you, you're using the process of creating an Isser. You can't create an Isser like a Bechar. Bechar, you don't create the Isser. So when you just say Harezu Kebechar, the Rambam paskins, it's a Davar Asur. But when I say Zeh Kazeh, even though I didn't create the Yisr of Bechar, I could extend the Kedusha. Extending the Kedusha only works if the item is Kadosh. If it's Lefnei Zrikas Hadam, La'achar Zrikas Hadam, it's not Kadosh. The Rambam holds Bi'ikarei Kamatfis. Bi'ikarei Kamatfis is a Svara. When I'm creating the Yisr, what do I mean when I invoke something else? But in the world of Hamshacha, there's no concept of Bi'ikarei Kamatfis. In the world of Hamshacha, either it's holy now or it's not holy now. Says Rabbi Chanan, Aval Lama Shenasba'arti Asi Shapir. Dibe'emes mitzad din Hamshacha. You see, even though the Rambam holds Bechar is a Davar Ha'asur, it is a Davar Ha'asur, but the Isser is an Isser Kachim. It's not a Davar Hanadur, it's a Davar Ha'asur, but it's a Davar Ha'asur with an Isser Kachim. So since it's a Davar Ha'asur with Isser Kachim, I can extend it. So even though the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda that Bechar is a Davar Ha'asur, and therefore the concept of the Nedarim type of Hatfasa is not applicable, but the Hamshachas Kedusha is applicable. The Be'emes mitzadin Hamshacha Shayich Shaper Hatfasa Gam Bebechar. Umasha Pasak Deloy Mahani, that's talking about where the other piece is not in front of you. So there's no Hamshacha. There's only the concept of the other Hatfasa, where I create the Isser Neder like another Isser Neder. El Hatfasa B'Guf HaNeder V'Zeloy Shayich Bebechar. That's not applicable by Bechar. Kivan the Eloi Makdish Le Nami Kadosh, because by Bechar the Isser Hamshacha, the Isser of Guf HaNeder is not applicable. You know why? Guf HaNeder is, I would like to create an Isser Neder like that thing. But the thing is, that thing, you didn't create an Isser, it would have been wholly irrespective. The Eloi Makdish Le Nami Kadosh. Ein Hatfasa V'Mashinasa Idei Neder, Ch'divei Ram ben Nedarim. You see, the Rambam's correct. When you say Harezu Kebechar, it's meaningless. Why? Because the other Bechar, the Bechar is not in front of you, so you can't do Hamshacha. But what you're doing is, I want to create a new Isser like that Bechar. Shkoyach, that Bechar, you didn't create the new Isser, the Torah did. But when Bechar meat isn't lying in front of you, even though the Torah created that Kachim, I could extend it. If it's before the sprinkle of the blood, there's no kedusha. All there is the din of Bikari Kamatfis. Bikari Kamatfis is a logic in the other realm of Hatfasa, the realm of I'm creating a new Isser, like I'm invoking where it could be done elsewhere. So let's say I say, Harezu Isser Neder Kibasar Shlamim. So what I'm referring to is when a Shlamim was Asr before the Zrikas Hadam. But I can't be referring to when a Bechar was Asr before the Zrikas Hadam, because a Bechar before the Isser of before the Zrikas Hadam, I didn't create that Isser. Shehu Hatfasa B'guf HaNeder Shaykh Ela B'Shlamim V'loi B'Bechar. Why? Because we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, do I have a Davar nadar? Basically, it comes out the Shaila of Rami Bar Chama of B'Ikare Kamatfis is a Shaila in the Nedarim Dika Hatfasa. When I invoke, I would like to create a new Isser like that thing, and that thing right now, after Zrikas Hadam is permitted, what do I mean? Do I mean in its state before the Zrikas Hadam, or in its state after the Zrikas Hadam? So regarding that, the Rambam paskins B'Ikare Kamatfis. Legabe Bechar, the Rambam paskins Bechar is a Davar HaAsar. That doesn't mean you can't do the process of Hamshacha. So basically this whopper Chiddush, this Veltz Chiddush of Rabbi Elchanon answers the stira of the Ran and answers the stira in the Rambam. In the Ran, take a look at, you could harv on this, but it's mamish very clear and beautiful amdas. In the Ran in Nedarim says that Hatfasa only works with Davar Hanadur. The Ran says, because since I'm creating the Nedar, I can only have, my words only have significance if I say like something else that I created, not like something else the Torah created. But the Ran in Shvua says the rationale of Davar Hanadur is I can only extend in a Ser Kedusha, not in a Ser Torah. So two different svaras of the Ran. The Rabbi Chanan says, yeah, two different svaras of the Ran, they're two different processes. And the proof that there are two different processes is the Rambam paskins Bechar is Davar Ha Asr, and if you say Harezu Kebechar, it's meaningless. And yet the Rambam also paskins B'Ikare Kamatfis, and the Rambam paskins that if you say Zek Kezeh by Bechar, then by Bechar, if it's Kaidim Zrikas Hadam Asr, Lachar Zrikas Hadam Mutter. How? How could Hatfasa work by Bechar if the Rambam holds Bechar is Davar Asr? That proves that even though Bechar is Davar HaAsr, that just negates the Neder Dika Hatfasa, where I want to create an Isser and I invoke another situation where I've created an Isser that doesn't apply by Bechar, because I didn't create the Isser by Bechar. But the Hamshachas HaKedusha, I could be Mamshech from Bechar. The only thing is, it has to be Kaidim Zrikas Hadam. That's the sugya. That's the answer to the stira in the Rans. That's the answer to the stira in the Rambams. There are two types of hatfasa. There's a Nedarim dika hatfasa, where I create the Isser and I'm merely invoking another situation where I also create the Isser. And then there's a Hamshachas Kedusha. And the beautiful thing about this is Bechar, even though it's a Davar HaAsr, but it's an Isser Kachim, so I could still be Mamshechet. I have to call it a day. If you have any questions, you could call me after 1. Or anytime. Hatzlacha. It's good stuff. If you have the Marmakoimos, take a look. It's good, beautiful stuff. Hatzlacha. Kol tov, everyone.